you. Thank you. I love maps. I love them. And I'm going to try to use maps to enhance the story. The last two lectures just set me up perfectly because those are characters, Anza and Pike, that are going to be part of my presentation. So we'll just jump right in. I also like the image of Colorado. The Great Plains butting up against all these mountain chains. And we heard, what was it, the rectilinear? Man, this must have made Jefferson happy if he could see the shape of this state. 4 degrees of latitude by 9 degrees of longitude. And I always people are always wondering, well, how did Colorado get its shape? And I can tell you that with certainty. In the 1859 to 1861 period, when they were debating the creation of the Colorado Territory back in Washington, D.C., the senators and the congressmen had this uncanny ability to anticipate precisely the dimensions of a modern PowerPoint slide. And that's how we got our shape. But we are going to go back in history because through most of our history, this is actually what Colorado was thought to be. This was a place where we are now that, of course, the native population understood it, but the map makers in Europe and back in the eastern part of the United States had no idea. So we're going to go through this history and then talk about how these 4 expeditions caused Colorado then to become known and on the map. So we're going to begin with a great leap forward. Before this time, no maps were showing anything but mythical information about the Southwest. And with this map by Nicolas Sanson, the great French map maker, he was so good that he caused France to really elevate to becoming the top of the map-making world for about 100 years. And with this map, we see for the first time details about the upper Rio Grande Valley. And through most of this talk, you're going to see that Colorado history is indicated on maps is really New Mexico history. Most of the information comes up from the south, and this is the beginning of that. Now, how did he get the information of actual places? Santa Fe, several pueblos that are still names that you can recognize today. Taos. How did he get that? He got that from Friar Benavides, who was stationed in the Santa Fe area, and he came back, wrote this information. It got to Nicolas Sanson, and now we have this information on a published map. Now, you must be wondering about the Great Lake to the headwaters of the Rio Grande. Of course, that was native knowledge conveyed to the Spanish of a great interior lake, we presume the Great Salt Lake, and it was placed mistakenly at the headwaters of the river. And you can see something peculiar about the river on the bottom end as well, because it's coming out to drain into the Pacific instead of into the Gulf of Mexico. But we'll now move. Oh, where is Colorado on the map? Nothing is known above Taos. So Colorado's not yet on the map. We're going to move to the next great leap forward rather than deal with all the little steps. And that was a wonderful map by Vincenzo Maria Coronelli, who was a brilliant Italian map maker, so good that he was brought to Paris by the King of France to make maps for him and globes for him. And this extraordinary map was brought forth, which was then a great leap forward again in knowledge of the interior. And we'll look at a close-up. And now we see the space that is the upper Rio Grande Valley around Santa Fe and all those villages and pueblos that is very accurate, even we would think so today. How could that be known? Well, it was known by Governor Diego de Peñalosa. Peñalosa was the governor from 1661 to 1664. He was a bad guy. When you read about him, he did these terrible things to people, he was finally taken down as governor, taken to Mexico City, tried and banished from the Spanish, New Spain and Spain. He, of course, went right to France to sell his secret information to the French, and that information was conveyed to Coronelli, and that's how it got on this map. So this image that you're looking at now, 1687, that would be the image that would remain for the New Mexico area for about 100 years. It's not advanced in printed maps. Now let's jump forward. Now we've jumped forward about 75 years, and you would think, well, there must be a lot more information about the West. But where's Colorado? It's just an empty, unknown place to put a decorative cartouche. Now we're going to move forward to the next great leap, and that would be this map. Collot, Georges Henry Victor Collot, made a map based upon his investigations of the upper Missouri, of the lower Missouri and the upper Mississippi, where he was scouting secretly for the French. The Spanish were in control of St. Louis at the time, and he was able to get the map of Antoine Saillard, who was their surveyor general in St. Louis, and as a result came up with this map. And this is a tremendous leap forward. And the first thing you notice now is the great Stony Mountains, or Yellow Mountains, is shown on this map, but the Great Rocky Mountain chain. Doesn't it look a little too far to the west? It is. And the reason is the confusion between the Sierra Nevadas and the Rockies, and the map maker doesn't know. He's just pushing these two together and sort of setting them in the middle. They didn't really understand the Sierras at this time. So everything is way too far to the west, and that's going to come into our story later, because that will be in the mind of Pike and Lewis and Clark and these explorers. Now, if we look at a close-up, we see something really interesting. This is the Platte, and mistakenly there are 3 great branches rather than 2, but right here we have branch that has its source near Santa Fe, This was not yet understood at this early time, but it was believed in Missouri and St. Louis that there must be some commercial way to connect with the western outposts of the French and Americans and the northern outposts of the Spanish. And we see evidence of it on this map. So that sets us up for the explorations in the early 1800s. And we've learned so much so far today about the Louisiana Purchase and then the Lewis and Clark expedition. I want you to look carefully at the track of Lewis and Clark. And the reason I want you to study this is for you to realize that they never got anywhere near Colorado. So again, for the Lewis and Clark expedition and the information they brought back, they learned a lot about the western distance, but they didn't really bring back any knowledge of Colorado. Now, at the time that Pike left, there was this theory that there was a great height of land. There was one central spot, a super high spot in the mountains, presumably on that mountain chain, from which all the great rivers of the West emanated. Now, we can look at this map, which is accurate, as we know it today, and we can see, in fact, there are 2 great heights of land. Colorado clearly is one, and sort of western Montana, northern Wyoming, Idaho, there's another cluster from which all these great rivers of the West do depart, but it's not one. But Pike is going to have that in his mind when he leaves. So now let's burn in your minds. I want you to just, especially those of you who don't live in Colorado, get in your mind the course of the South Platte, the Arkansas, and the Rio Grande, because we're going to be talking about those 3 rivers through the rest of my discussion. So let's go on to Pike. I am so delighted with the presentation that we've already had by John Murphy to set this amazing guy up. And he also saves me a little bit of time of background that I do not need to do. So let's just jump right into his goals. We understand that there was a lack of agreement between New Spain and the United States on what this southern boundary was. And there were all different kinds of things that could be the boundary, but it was likely to involve the Red River somewhere along its course, and also the Arkansas further to the west. And so Zebulon Pike, as part of his mission, was to try to understand these two rivers, the Red River and the Arkansas River. And I'm putting this up just so you can kind of remind yourself of where these two great rivers actually are. Now, it was believed at the time that the Red River, because it has such an enormous volume of water as it enters the Mississippi, probably went even further west. And as we saw on John Murphy's map that he showed us that Pike took, it shows the Red River right near as headwaters, mistakenly right near the Arkansas River. So the Red doesn't go that far, but it was thought to probably go that far. And so that's what's going on with Pike. So now Zebulon Pike comes up the Arkansas River, and he gets to the spot where we are right now, the confluence with the Fountain River. And I'm a mountain climber, and I've been up Pikes Peak several times. But can you imagine climbing Pikes Peak from where we're standing right now? And thinking that it was so close that, well, let's not take our bedrolls. I mean, we'll be back before you know it. They left at 1 p.m. on November 24th, and as we've heard a wonderful discussion of the details of where they went, how they got there, I will skip all of that, only to say that 3 days later, on November 27th, according to Pike's Journal, we arose hungry, dry from thirst, and extremely sore from the inequality of the rocks which we had lain on all night. So these poor mountaineers came on back down and continued their quest. And now, as we heard earlier in the last lecture, they went up into the South Park area. They reached a small river, which they correctly assumed was a headwaters area of the South Platte. They didn't, in the map, know it was south and north. It was just the Platte. But that was a good guess. They crossed over Trout Creek and got into the upper Arkansas River area, went north to south of Twin Lakes. As we just heard, they came back on out. Now the question is, and when they came out, one of the stories is, well, Pike thought he was on the Red River. And when they finally came back out and got to near where they had been before at Canyon City, they suddenly discovered, no, we found our campsite. This is clearly the Arkansas. Another theory that we heard today was that Pike knew that all along, that he was probably on the Arkansas River when he crossed. I'm not sure which is true, but what we do know is that he wanted to find the Red River and the Rio Grande as well. And so he goes south, he crosses the pass into the San Luis Valley. He goes to the Conejos River where it joins with the Rio Grande, and they build this protective stockade. Now you have to recognize the tremendous difficulty that they were under. According to Pike's Journal, they were, quote, dressed only in light cotton summer overalls, moccasins, and no stockings. So imagine trudging through waist-deep snow for months, which they had been doing. That's why some of the men were described as having been left behind. During February, they were retrieved, but then 100 men, Spaniards, came up, captured them, took them down through Santa Fe, all the way down to Chihuahua, Mexico, where they were imprisoned. We heard about that in the last lecture, eventually released. So when they were released, they went back through the Texas area, to Washington, D.C., and in 1810, Pike published his journal with 6 maps in it. And I'm going to show you my favorite map, which I know you can read very clearly in the back row there. This is Pike's, I think, cartographic birth certificate for Colorado. And if we look at a close-up, we see the Arkansas River quite well mapped. Here's the Fountain River coming in right to where we are now. Then we have the course of the Arkansas. This says highest peak. What peak do you think that would be? Pikes Peak, absolutely, absolutely. Now, this map has a couple of great advances. One thing is it pretty accurately and understood the longitudinal positioning of where the Southern Rockies were. Where, remember that Szilard map where it was way, way, way out, too far to the west, that gets corrected. Now we see on this map the Platte River right here, the Yellowstone of the Missouri, just up a little ways north. The Arkansas, the Rio Grande, Colorado. On another version, there's the Snake River coming down. So all these rivers are coming together. What is Pike thinking? Pike is thinking that all these rivers of the West are in one high central spot. In fact, in his journal, he states, and I'm quoting, "I have no hesitation in asserting that I can take a position in the mountains from whence I can visit the source of any of those rivers in one day." Now, by horseback, presumably, but this is his thought. Now, how does he accomplish this fact? Because you've already seen on the map that many of these great rivers, the Missouri and the Columbia sources, those are way, way, way to the north. Well, Pike completely screws up the latitudinal positioning of these features in Colorado. He takes all of these features, these headwaters, the Pike's Peak and so forth, he pushes everything up 200 miles north on his map. And this is how he's able to make everything connect. But of course, it is wrong. So now let's look at the implications of, well, we won't. We'll do that on a little bit later. Now, the next map we're going to move to are the maps that came from the exploration of Dominguez and Escalante in 1776. And then we're going to review Anza again and put it on the national context in the map. Now, the theory in 1776 was we saw Anza brought a southern route to get to California, but the thought was, well, there must be a northern route also. We must be able to connect our outpost in Santa Fe with our missions in Monterey. And how could that possibly make sense at the time? You'd think, what a difficult land journey that would be based upon what we know. But that's not what they thought. What they thought was that there must be an enormous volume of water in a river coming from the west, perhaps from this Great Lake. When they saw the Sacramento River coming into the great San Francisco Bay and this huge volume of water, they thought, well, this might be that source, that river going inland. At this time, they did not understand the Sierra Nevadas. The Rio Grande, the Mississippi, the Columbia, these all go in for 1,000 miles, and why not a great river from the west? And the thought was, well, we'll just hop over these mountains here, and then somewhere out in what we would now know as Utah, we'll find this great river, and we're going to just float on right down to San Francisco Bay, and we'll be near Monterey. And that's what they were thinking when they went on this trip. Now, they might not be right. They might find a land route as well, but that was the hope. Now, we can look at this map and instantly realize that the Sierra Nevadas are capturing this great volume of water with the Sacramento from the north and the San Joaquin from the south, but they didn't understand that at that time. And so this great mission was launched, and we had Friar Sylvester Escalante, who was stationed in the Mexico area. He was actually working in the Zuni mission at that time. He knew a lot about the West. He knew a lot about the Indians at that time. And then Friar Francisco Dominguez was sent up from Mexico City as an official observer. And so these two friars are going to go on the great Dominguez Escalante expedition. And they were going to have someone with them, my hero, Bernardo de Miera y Pacheco. And he was a really remarkable person when you read his background. He was had been a mayor. He was an experienced military man. He was an astronomer. He was a map maker. He was a renowned artist. And he would go on this expedition as well. So focusing on Colorado, they came up through northwestern New Mexico. They came along the west. Now I want you to notice, here's the Rio Grande. There's all these rivers that run south into the San Juan. They cut across those. See this hook of the Dolores? You'll see that over and over on these maps, and that's one way you can always position yourself. They went across the Gunnison, the Colorado, and then they worked their way out into Utah. And this shows their trek into Utah. They got to Utah Lake, which is about 35 miles south of the Great Salt Lake. They didn't make it to the Great Salt Lake. They heard about it. They were told about it. But they were starting to run out of supplies. They needed to keep moving. And as they moved south and west, things got colder, things got more desperate. And finally they cast lots, decided we better go home. And they made it miraculously all the way back to Santa Fe without loss of life in this very small party, most of the time about 10 men. That would result in a map. We saw another version of it in the Anza presentation. This is the one I like. There are 4 known manuscript maps that were made by Miera y Pacheco and have survived. And this is one of them. And so when we look at the map, this would be approximately Colorado's southern state line, and then it would go to about there and up in that area. So all of this area in this southern, far western part of what would become Colorado is now known to the Spanish. So does this come out onto our maps, the published maps? No, it doesn't. Of course not. These are the Spanish. As we learned earlier, the Spanish keep this stuff secret. The Dutch map publishers, the English map publishers, the French map publishers, they all, when their expeditions came back, they immediately shared that information with the trade and it was published. But the Spanish felt these were their defensive cartographic secrets. And so the results of this information was known in Mexico City, it was known in Spain, but it was not known in America. It was not known in the eastern United States, and it was not known in all the publishing parts of Europe. Then we go on to the Anza expedition, which you now know a lot about. So I'm not going to spend any time giving you the background of Anza. This would occur 3 years after the Escalante Dominguez expedition. And quickly they came up through the San Luis Valley, crossed over into South Park, down to south of Colorado Springs, and worked their way down. We know the great battle was the 3 battles. I loved his presentation, by the way. I learned so much and came on back down. Now, I'm showing you this because, of course, they learned a lot about central southern Colorado, and it would be revealed on this map. So this map was made by the same Bernardo de Miera y Pacheco, who was on that expedition. This map was shared with the authorities in Mexico City and back in Spain, and it is going to show new features like the Arkansas River, the Fountain River, more detail on the Rio Grande, what you might think of as central Colorado, southern Colorado features that were not known before. Now, is this going to be known to the European map publishers? No. Same thing. It's kept secret. How does that change? It changes with the great Baron Alexander von Humboldt. How many of you know a lot about, or know something about Alexander von Humboldt? Raise your hands. Yeah, he's an extraordinary genius. He went down to South America, did all these great explorations, figured out all kinds of things about our systems of weather and plants and climate zones. And then he went to Mexico City in 1803. And when he arrived, he had a letter from the Spanish king giving him authority to investigate the archives in Mexico City and to make a map and to bring that map back. And in 1804, he's bringing back the map. Now, what sources is he using? He's using all kinds of different sources for all kinds of different parts of Mexico. But in terms of the northern area, he's going to use Anza and Dominguez Escalante and that information from those two maps. He is a great fan of Thomas Jefferson's, and Thomas Jefferson has heard about him. And so they get together in 1804 on his way back to Europe. And he shows his draft map of New Spain. And I'll show you the map that Humboldt made. He shows that to Thomas Jefferson. And you can just imagine Thomas Jefferson saying, "Oh, well, let's leave the map here. Let's go to dinner. Let's go have a nice long evening together." And then instantly all the military copyists coming in and taking terribly important notes, which we then learned in the last session were shared with Pike. And that's a controversy. Some would argue that that information wasn't shared with Pike until he got back, and others would argue, as John Murphy did, that it was indeed a map that Pike took with him on the expedition. But in any case, we can look to the northern part of this river, of this map, and now we see, for the first time from the Spanish information, the River Nepestal, which it says here, may this be the Arkansas, with a question mark, and of course it was the Arkansas. We see the Rio Grande, we see now the Dolores, the San Juan, the Gunnison, the Colorado. A lot of this information is somewhat wrong and draining into the wrong places, but it's amazing compared to the absolute absence of any information beforehand. So we've now talked about Pike and Humboldt delivering these two expeditions, both in the same year, 1810. So now let's look how that reveals itself on a major map that kind of tells us what they're thinking at the time. I love this great map by John Mellish. It's about that long, a huge monster. And it really shows this idea of manifest destiny, doesn't it? I mean, it's really being demonstrated by him. Now, 1819 was the Treaty of Adams-Onis, in which the Spanish in New Spain and the United States finally agreed on what the boundary would be between Mexico and the United States. And in the east, indeed, it does involve the course of the Red River, and then it goes to about the 100th parallel, bounces north to the Arkansas, and follows the Arkansas out. And if we look at a close-up of this map, I'm zeroing in on the area that would become Colorado on this map. So here is the course of the Arkansas River. This is Pikes Peak, right? Highest peak. And it keeps going up and it hits this line and goes west. Now, what is the line that it is hitting? That is the 42nd parallel in accordance with the treaty. Now you're thinking, okay, where's the 42nd parallel? Think of the line, the northern boundary of California, Nevada, and Utah. That line is the 42nd parallel. Another way to think of it, it's about 70 miles into Wyoming from the Colorado border. Now, what we notice on this map is that this line just goes straight to the 42nd because the Arkansas is conceived as going north of the 42nd. Why? Because of Pike's error. So all of Pike's mistakes, placing Colorado's features too far to the north, are what was thought to be true, and therefore they're shown on what was then the best map showing the boundary with this line. I'm pointing this out because you're going to note how this changes with our next explorer, and that's Major Stephen Long. So Long is in a very different position in 1820 when he leads his expedition than Pike. He has got a true scientific expedition. He's with the War Department's new topographical unit. And so this division is now going out to make much more careful analysis. He has artists, Samuel Seymour and Titian Peale. He has the botanist, Dr. Edwin James. He has astronomers. So he has the scientific expertise and improved instruments to do this study. And so we're going to see how, once he gets to Colorado, how this would change his results. So he is going to come down the South Platte. Remember, Pike came in on the Arkansas, but on this expedition, Long is coming in from the South Platte. And you can imagine what they're all waiting to see as they're coming in, walking, trudging along that prairie. They're waiting to see the mountains, right? And finally, we read in his journal, and I'm quoting, Long's men were cheered by the distant view of Rocky Mountains. And throughout that morning, at first they thought they were clouds. No, they're not clouds, they're a mountain. Yeah, they're clouds. And by the afternoon, they knew, no, they had found the Rockies. And now we have the artist's depiction of the first sighting of the Rocky Mountain chain. And we know that that would be in northern Colorado. Think Fort Collins and the mountains, Long's Peak and Loveland and all those. That would be the area that they would be looking at. They continued down the Front Range, and they got to a campsite on July 4th, which I've shown right here. And we believe, based upon reading the journal, that that was the confluence of the Cherry Creek and the Platte, South Platte. They were right in downtown Denver. They were at Confluence Park, for all we know, back in 1820. And they continued down, wanting to find the source of the South Platte. They followed it to where it went into the mountains. We know it as Cheeseman Canyon. And they went in, they started going up one ridge to the west, down, up another higher ridge, down, up another. They got to the third ridge and they said, hey, we got places to go. We can't keep going forever in the mountain ranges to figure out the headwaters of the South Platte. So they came back out and they continued down the Front Range. And they talked about in their journal, and I quote, we saw many masses of sandstone bearing a striking resemblance to colossal ruins. And some of you know this. This is depicted in their journal as published in 1823 as Elephant Rock. You can really see the elephant in this, but they called it Castle Rock in their journal and on their map. So many people look at the map, they see Castle Rock, and they think, wow, I didn't know Castle Rock was on the map that early, but that's actually their depiction of Elephant Rock. They went over the Palmer Divide, and what did they find? Again, but this great big mountain. And they were there in the summer, unlike Pike. And so it was a much better season for mountaineering. And so Dr. James, with a few others, climbed successfully Pike's Peak. So, of course, Long wanted to name the highest peak that we know Pike had tried to climb 14 years earlier. He wanted to name it in honor of what he thought was the first person to climb it, Dr. James. They continued down to get to where we are right now, went upstream a little bit on the Arkansas to about Canyon City, and then came back and wanted to go down on the Arkansas and they started their way to the east to finish up their exploration. When he got to an area about at La Junta, Colorado, he decided to split his forces, and he asked Captain Bell to continue going down the Arkansas, making technical calculations of the course of the Arkansas. He took the remainder of his troops down south to find that doggone Red River. Where is that Red River? Now let's look at the map that Pike had published. This map, Pike hadn't found the Red River. He just knows it's somewhere down there. He knows it's east of the Rio Grande and it's south of the Arkansas. And so this is what Long is expecting to find as he goes to the south. So he goes down. I'm sure he's following I-25 just like we would. He goes over Raton Pass. He gets to a first little creek flowing to the south. And he thinks, wow, let's follow this. And it gets bigger and bigger, and then it flows out to the east through what would today be northeastern New Mexico. It gets larger and larger, and they think, we have found it. We have found the Red River. But not so. They had found the Canadian River. And the funny thing about the Canadian River is it comes right back to the Arkansas. And the remarkable thing in the journal, these two groups, Bell and Long, managed to get to the confluence within 1 day of each other. What a coincidence. So they still hadn't found the Red River. They knew it was even further south and not yet determined by Long. So now let's look at the map that he would generate in his journal in 1823. I'm sure you're enjoying the details of that map. We will look at a close-up, though, and this would be their version of the South Platte. This would be their version of the Arkansas. And I want to point out highest peak. What is that? Long's Peak. This one says James Peak. What would that become? Pike's Peak. In fact, it had been named Pike's Peak on a map printed 4 years earlier. And there we have the Spanish Peaks. So these three great mastiffs that you and I see from the minute we enter Colorado on I-25 till we leave into New Mexico, almost the entire way, one of those three great mastiffs is in our view. We see the word great, American, and of course desert is down on the map below. And so Long is thinking this great high plains of Colorado and northeastern New Mexico is a great desert, and that's going to pervade thinking from that point on. So now let's see how this reveals itself on a modern map. I love this map by Henry Tanner. It's another huge map, and I love this cartouche in the corner. It's actually, that art is about this big around. It's just fantastic. But we're going to focus now on this same area that we looked at before Long with now what we're looking at after Long. And the thing that jumps out at you instantly, all these features, this is all the Escalante Dominguez stuff. This is all the Anza material, which has now been supplemented by Long's expedition, and Pike's material, and this is Long here. But you notice this straight line. That is because Long has pulled all these features down to their proper latitudinal position, and therefore under the Adams-Onis Treaty, the border goes straight to the 42nd parallel. Now, for you Texans in the room, that's going to make you think of these maps, because in fact, that is exactly that eastern border of this unhappy period when Colorado was beset by Texas claims. Fortunately, in 1850, the Compromise of 1850, after the Mexican-American War, Texas was broke, and they got cut down to size to their normal size. Now, I'm just about to wrap up, but I want to we've really finished the 4 expeditions, and let's just review what they were. So Pike goes up the Arkansas, goes down the Rio Grande, and publishes material in 1810. Escalante Dominguez They go on their expedition in a circuit of northwestern Colorado, Utah, and so forth. Their information doesn't get published until Alexander von Humboldt in 1810. Same with Anza, not revealed until Alexander von Humboldt in 1810, and then in 1823, the long information gets out there. Now, I just don't want you to think there weren't lots of other expeditions going on in Colorado, and these are a few of them that happened in the 1830s and 40s and 50s. And so let's just take a look at what Colorado ends up looking like. I've got the red box of Colorado, and let's just review the 4 territories that had been created by the late 1850s. Colorado would become a territory in 1861. So these are the 4 territories that it's carved out of. This line right here, that's the 40th parallel. That's the northern boundary of Kansas. And if any of you know Baseline Road in Boulder, Colorado, that's the baseline. So Denver is just a little bit south of the 40th parallel, so we were very much in Kansas at the time. Are any of you CU football fans? Well, if you've ever been to the stadium, you know when they played Nebraska, for some reason, CU doesn't do very well over the many years, in most years. But I know why, because in fact, that stadium is actually an old Nebraska territory. And so it's sort of a home game for the Nebraska football team when they come. So then we see the New Mexico Notch, which caused all kinds of problems because you had these people very much of the Mexican, Catholic, Spanish-speaking population that get meshed in with this population to the north, all of whom came from the east. This would change then, of course, with the great gold rush of started in the fall of 1858, but when gold was discovered, but really 1859 and 1860, it's thought that 100,000 people came out to the Front Range of Colorado, most of whom went back disgusted and broke, but many stayed to create a state. And so the final map I'm going to show you is this one. On February 28, 1861, Colorado became a territory, and we see the boundaries here as shown on the first territorial map by the Surveyor General appointed by President Lincoln. And I do have a question for you, though. Why 1861? After all, in 1859, there was tremendous energy and wealth coming out of the Front Range area. The population of the Front Range area was greater than it was in eastern Kansas at that time. There were delegations sent from the mining communities back to Washington, D.C. in 1859 and in 1860, crying for local government, trying to get a new territory, yet it was not created. Why? Civil War. I heard that rumble throughout the room. Exactly. The sectional crisis kept Colorado from being created. So why February 28, 1861? Just before, the delegates from the 7 southern states who first succeeded, they all left Washington, D.C. You know, they could immediately create. They created within a few weeks Dakota Territory, Colorado Territory, and Nevada. All were created because of the absence of these southern delegates. So I'm going to stop my presentation there. Do I have more time? Okay, I have one, super, because I have one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that is big picture now. Why in the world was Colorado so late in showing up on the map? New Mexico. We have Spanish settlements starting to grow as early as the late, Spaniards are going up and settling in the late 1570s and 80s. The Spanish conquer the area and create Santa Fe in 1610. Colorado's capital, Denver, Colorado, Denver shows up on the map, it's not a capital yet, in 1859. You have a quarter of a millennium between New Mexico's settlement via the Spanish and Colorado's settlement via the Eastern Americans. Why that difference? Why that gap? Well, there are many reasons for the delay, but let's think of a few. First of all, obviously the mountain chain, right? All of the traffic that was going east and west, and you know in this room better than just about anybody, was all east and west. And the last place you wanted to go was through the Rockies, right? You went up over South Pass or something like that, or there were routes through New Mexico. There sure weren't routes through Colorado. I mean, a few trappers were here, and there were some little extremely difficult routes, but that was the last place you wanted to be. It was high, it was elevated. Was it good for agriculture? It was terrible for agriculture at the time. These eastern prairies all dry up in the fall. In fact, in the absence of reservoirs and irrigation systems like we have today, and flood irrigation and all that, the only rivers that flow were the South Platte and the Arkansas. So there's no way you could have successful agriculture based on the agricultural systems at that time. How about the Indian population? Yeah, Colorado was truly controlled by the native population. Think of the contrast between New Mexico with the Spanish 250 years before came up and were able to conquer the indigenous people along the Rio Grande. Why was that the case? And why did that not occur north in Colorado? The indigenous people along the Rio Grande in what is now New Mexico were agricultural people. They lived in apartment buildings called pueblos. They were stationary. They were able to be dominated and conquered by the weaponry and techniques that the Spanish had at the time. The people in Colorado were roaming around. They were not, in general, they might plant a few crops and leave for the season and come back and see what was there, but they were basically roaming around, moving with game and so forth. They were unconquerable based upon the military techniques, the weaponry and so forth that the Spanish had at the time, or the Americans or the French. And that was another key reason why this great delay. And finally, in 1859, with this extraordinary flood-in of thousands of people with repeating rifles and so forth, you know the story. Then over the next couple of decades, through starvation and military activity, the Indians were taken out generally, and the area these people were fully conquered. But there was about a 250-year gap between what occurred in New Mexico and Colorado. And I know you're going to say, oh, wait a minute, there were a few little villages in the San Luis Valley and on the Arkansas Valley. And you're right. But usually those villages would immediately get wiped out as soon as they had enough sheep to make it worthwhile by the Navajo or the Utes, and they'd go right back down to Taos, and in a few years come back up and try it again. I'll stop right there. Thank you.